Hi guys, we're back, and today we have Dr. Diane Mueller with us, the Libido Doc. We're
Ooh.
super jazzed to get talking about sexy stuff.
And that's exactly how I describe it, Alicia. It's exactly what it is. It's like I blend the science with the sexy stuff, and it makes for a really fun conversation because I love talking about the research. I love talking about motivation of how to keep relationships hot for the long term. And I love talking about the sexy stuff. So it's exactly the perfect intro for today.
I love it. Sexy
Thank
stuff for life.
you. For some of us, science is also sexy. So,
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I'm with you on that.
Wholeheartedly.
so would you like to tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got onto all of this?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two parts of the story that I often talk about. And one is going back to my very, very late teens, early 20s, when I started having this real chronic vulvar pain.
Mm.
And nobody could like figure out, no doctors could figure out what was going on. This was before I was in medical school. And so I didn't know much about root causes and that sort of thing at that point. But went to conventional docs. Everybody's like, well, tests are normal, so that's good. But the pain was like substantial enough to be keeping me up at night.
Oh, wow.
And so it was like real significant. And I had a roommate at the time that was very open about talking about her masturbation practice, which to me was like, whoa, lady, like what's going on? It was like not in my world of something I did or something that I talked about at all. But I think she was sick of hearing me complain about this pain because I was very open in telling her, like, gosh, I'm not sleeping. What is going on? And one day she hands me this book, and it was the book Sex for One by Betty Dodson. And this book it does talk about self pleasure and a masturbation practice, but what it does is it really looks at what is happening to the people that Betty was working with and subjects she was working with and helping and what was happening to them beyond just pleasure. And one of the things that came up in repeat stories in this book was pain that had disappeared through self pleasure. So I was like, one desperate night, I was like, all right, I'm going to try this. I was raised real, real Catholic, a lot of dogma. And so this was like very against my beliefs at the time. And I tried it and the pain went away. And so that was like, these moments we get, I think, as like growing humans and growth oriented humans, where it's like, okay, it was kind of like shattering to my own like some mental psyche and mental makeup to say, okay, well, if this is wrong, is like kind of my question to myself. If this is wrong, then how come this could be actually healing me when nothing else is helping?
Right.
And so that was one of like the first things that just got me interested in sex and interested in what this act was and interested in pleasure and why we have pleasure. And it honestly was just like a side hobby for from there for about 20 years, just something that I was just reading on my own and that sort of thing and exploring in my own life. Fast forward about 20 years later and going through when I went through a divorce, and then when I got together with my now partner, we've been together for about 5 years now. And I started really applying all these types of techniques to my current relationship, anything from like conscious communication to how do we talk about sex to how do we talk about all the other stuff in relationship beyond sex. And really looking at, I know, you talk about stuff like this on the show around, it's like, okay, well, what do as somebody that has, survived the trauma of divorce, like, what are the top 5 reasons why people get divorced? And, it's like when I look at surveys, lack of intimacy is one of the top five. It's not the only thing, of course, but it's one of the top five that comes up over and over and over again in a lot of surveys. So that's when I really started, especially after going through that myself and, wanting to make sure that that was not going to be the type of direction my future relationships would take. So I really began to not only apply this to my own relationship, but then start to, to say like, okay, well, even though I never thought I would be going online and talking about sex, it really became something that I just felt like I had to do because so many people are coming at this from like a porn or open relationship type of standpoint. And I'm not to say that that's like, if people decide to do that, that's their own prerogative. I'm not for or against that. But I think there's this big need for people that are saying, like, I do want to stay in my long-term monogamous relationship. I do want it to be healthy. And those are the people I really reach out to help to make their relationships stronger so that they can stay together and stay together, not just out of obligation, right? But out of passion and out of love and out of like desire to be fulfilled, within the context of their long-term relationship.
Mm. I mean, so many places that we can start with that. But, I think one of the first things you said that jumped out to me is if this is wrong, why is it helping?
Yeah.
Right? Like we're very analytical beings in terms of how we want to understand things. We want a sense of control around it. And like our analytical mind isn't the only intelligence that lives in us. Our body has this whole abundance of intelligence. And I mean, Alicia, you're going to love my favorite word, experimenting comes in to help us better connect with our body to understand its wisdom. Because, I mean, our parents can't really teach us. Like, they can teach us when you need to potty and what hunger signals are, right? But your body is your body. So props to the open roommate who are just like, here, just give it a go. And the importance of just experimenting to understand how to listen to your body. And I guess that's what I'm curious about as like a start off question for me is like when you're talking to people, there's, especially when it comes to sexuality, there's a lot of complications around it, be that how you were brought up. You mentioned your, Catholic background, how it was very dogmatically like, don't do that. Um, there's a lot of shame associated with sexuality, which is a bummer in the simplest way of saying it. So when these people are coming to you and trying to vulnerably understand their bodies and wanting to listen versus being led by the analytical shoulds, how do you help them navigate that?
Yeah, I feel like this is a really important question because the level of shame that I think has been put on us, either from external reasons or even internal reasons, it's so deep. And, before I answer the question, I want to also say that I think with like some of the shame and the guilt and the things that are associated with this, we have kind of like just like with trauma, where we have like the big T traumas for like those really big things, things like abuse, for example, versus like the little T traumas, which are still really bad. Same thing is like true, I believe, for shame. It's like the big S shame and like the little s shame. And like the big S shame could be these like, these dogmatic things that are shoved down our throat, or like down there's dirty and those kind of, things. But then there's the little s shames too. And the little s shames can be as simple as maybe a partner goes down on the other partner and just like says something in passing about like the look or the smell or anything about the genitals, and maybe even like doesn't even think what they're saying. It just like came out of their mouth so quickly, and all of a sudden we hear it and we interpret it, and all of a sudden we shut down sexually because we think there's something wrong with how we look or we smell or we feel or any of that. So, I think with shame, it's like we have those big S shames and those little S shames, and they can all be very, very impactful to us.
Mm,
So I do feel, when it comes to healing from this, I don't feel like it's always essential to know where the shame comes from, but sometimes it can help because I think the biggest thing with understanding it is like the bigger picture of the story that comes with it. So, one of the things that I really realized, for example, and using myself as an example here with like the shame from, what I would call more of like a big ass shame, since it was like childhood rammed down my throat around like sex out of wedlock is bad, sex has to look this very vanilla way, or it's like wrong, masturbation's bad, all those things. And for me, it was really interesting. Like one of the ways I actually healed from shame around that was actually not running from the Bible. It was actually trying to understand more of what like the Bible meant. And
mm,
so like if you look at like the Bible, to like get a little biblical for people, if you look at certain things in the Bible, like like even when they're saying, okay, like man and woman, like what the, if you take the Hebrew words, they can actually be translated into partner and fire partner, not even man and woman, right? And so if we're looking and you actually start to dissect and go into like the actual other interpretations of the Bible, it actually is not, there's nowhere in the Bible that it even says masturbation's wrong that I've ever found, you know? And I've gone back and like now that we have AI, I've like asked Grok and asked Chat GPT and like, you know, and like so from AI verifying this, and you know, somebody always let me know if I'm wrong here. But from AI verifying this, like it's not that's where it comes from. It was that in around the 500s when we had certain there were certain popes in the Catholic Church, for example, and the popes were like, we don't want people doing this, so we're just going to start saying this is wrong. And so for me, like going back and actually understanding, like, oh, this was just one man, one human that was like, hey, we're just going to tell the whole rest of the world this is wrong. And once I understood that, it really started to like break down. I started to being able to like challenge it from not just like, hey, this feels wrong, but from my analytical mind being like, oh yeah, this way I've been taught is actually wrong. It actually was just one person's teaching that got propagated throughout time. So that's like an example of where I think like understanding the shame and understanding where it comes from, because if we can understand like the beliefs and understand the stories we're telling ourselves about it, you know, then it's like asking questions like, is this true? Is this ultimately true? Is this true throughout time? Is this true for all people? You know, and the more we can start asking those selves our questions and those questions, and we start to disprove those beliefs that we've had for a long time. And then, you know, that's just, of course, like superficial level. So it's like, I think anytime then we disprove them intellectually, then we need to, you know, take a stand back and say, okay, well, if that's not true, if this is not shameful, what do I want to believe instead? And that's where I think like the teachings on meditation, on visualization, on nervous system repatterning really come into play, because then what we're doing is we're taking a step back and saying, oh, how do I actually feel in my body and feel the expression of what do I want to believe? Really raising those emotions so that then we're actually changing our neurological reaction to when our brain is thinking about sex and intimacy and those sorts of things.
All right, I have a couple questions.
Yes.
Wait, wait, before we
Okay.
question it, I just want to make sure I have to verbally say it out loud to understand it. So can you confirm my understanding and then hit us with questions? So pretty much like when you're navigating people through the listening to your body versus the analytical shoulds and the shame, it's not always about understanding the past or where it came from, but the validity lies in understanding your story so you can ask yourself questions about your story to discern what's true for you to then create a new neurological understanding of how you want to move forward. Is that right?
Exactly. And I'll just like clarify like there one thing that I think sometimes understanding the past and where it came from can be helpful for understanding the story.
Mm.
Right. So sometimes it's like, oh, to really understand the story, it can be helpful to go through the past, but it is not essential. And that's like, I say that because some people are like, I really have no idea where this came from. You know, maybe it was something that was said in passing by a teacher during sex ed class and it just got into the subconscious and we never even know. So
Yeah.
it can be useful, but I just bring that up more because if people are like, I really have no idea, okay, no problem. And let's just actually think about like the beliefs and the feelings that are from it and go from there. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was a beautiful reframe, by the way, or summary. Anyway, I was also raised religious, and I remember my first introduction into thinking about things differently, and it was a coworker of mine showing me the vagina monologues and telling me that
Love, love those monologues.
I needed to get a mirror and I needed to get a vibrator, and she was like, "I'm going to help you out. Don't worry." But anyway, my question for the religious sector, since that's where I also came from, is the word fornication was what I was told was the word in the Bible that means masturbation. So how did you reconcile that one, or how do you understand that one?
Truthfully, I have not actually looked up fornication, but like anytime I come up, so this is my practice, right? So anytime I come up with something where it's like, oh, somebody challenges like that, something like that, then what my next thing to do is to look and say, okay, well, the Bible was originally written in Hebrew, right? And so then to actually look up and say, well, what is the Hebrew word for this? And what are different ways that word can be translated?
Mm,
And so if we look and say, oh, there's actually 10 different ways that word can be translated, then to me it says, oh, this was just, the scholars at the time who had their own agendas, right? Because anybody that does any teaching, like, it's like everybody has their own agendas as humans, right? And especially people are in power who want to keep their power and want to keep that structure. And so then it's like looking up, okay, well, if there's 10 different ways this could be interpreted, what other ways could this be interpreted that might actually not mean that? And so I haven't done that with that word. That's a great word to go and do that with. And I'm sure I'll be doing that later today. But that is my process. And so that's what I would encourage people to do. If they're like, well, what about this word or what about this verse and that sort of thing? Go and look up like, okay, well, how else could this be translated? And, and then dissect it using your own, intelligence and process it in that way.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I agree that everything's biased. Somebody was talking to me recently about why I don't like to listen to this outlet or this outlet because it's biased. And I was like, everything's biased. Research is biased. There's no way around bias.
yeah.
But
Exactly.
but that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
Back to the topic here. So you also mentioned something that really stands out to me because there's this joke that if you want to never have sex again, you should get married. So obviously, there's a pattern in marriages or long-term relationships where sex does dwindle and the passion fades, and people talk about that all the time. We're talking about nervous system resets and reframing and challenging our beliefs, and I love all of that stuff. Is that the core of fighting this stagnation, shall we say, that can happen in long-term relationships?
I will answer that with a story,
Oh, I love
which
stories.
is I was listening to a talk by Richard Bandler, who's the founder of neurolinguistic, one of the co-founders of neurolinguistic programming, a brain and nervous system repatterning system. And he was talking about how when he was first engaged and about to get married, like people were coming up to him and saying, well, you better get all the sex in now because as soon as you get married, it's going to go downhill, right? Similar to what you're saying. And being somebody that really has developed this system on brain retraining, his response to people was, you mean I'm going to practice something over and over and over again and get worse at it? How does that make sense? And so the way I describe this to people is this. Imagine learning a guitar, and you pick up a guitar for the very first time and you're practicing a D chord and you're like, oh, wow, I finally got it. And all the strings sound good. And you like really nail this chord and you add in a C chord and you add in an F chord. And so now you have three chords and you learn all these different strumming patterns. And it's like, wow, the first year, it's like, I can play these three chords perfectly and I can play them 20 different ways with all these strumming patterns. It's super exciting. And you continue, and every day for the next 20 years, all you do is these three chords. So, like, what's exciting, like, now turns boring and monotonous. And left to our own devices, like if we're like, well, I'm never going to put time, effort, and energy into learning other chords, learning finger picking, learning other ways I can bring rhythm in, adding vocals. What if we're not doing that with a guitar and we're not actively trying to prevent ourselves from getting into that rut of only those three chords because we don't bring anything else in, 20 years from now, it's going to get a little boring. And so the same thing is true with intimacy is that one of the things that I have found is with intimacy, like we tend to, left to our own devices, we get into these sexual scripts and it's normal and it's human. And it's because we're creatures of habit. We drive to the grocery store the same way every day, most of us, right? walks around my neighborhood, left to my own devices. I always turn right here, turn left there, go straight there, and just do the exact same route. And so with sex and with, intimacy in general, it's the same thing. If we are not actively putting energy in to saying like, okay, well, what can we, what kind of chord can we create this time? And how can we bring some newness into it this week? And it doesn't have to be every time by any means. It just has to be a continued practice to say, oh, maybe once a month, couple times a month, we're going to bring something fun in, or we're going to bring something back that we haven't done in 7 years, that sort of thing, right?
That sounds dangerous. No.
I mean, provided, within the body's limits, of course, and flexibility and all those things. Absolutely. Very good point. But, it's one of, when you ask if it's the core of my teaching, it's the only thing that you said that I would maybe hesitate on accuracy, because one of the things I have found in health, in medicine, and intimacy is that as humans, we are oftentimes looking for that kind of like root one thing that if we do this, everything will change. And in the intimacy world, the number one thing that people bring up is testosterone replacement therapy. And TRT is amazing for both women and men. I'm in perimenopause. I'm on testosterone. Take it every day. Changes my life. Love it. But the number of times I see people do something like focus on just one thing versus something, or like, testosterone, for example, versus like the whole picture. And they start on something like testosterone and they feel maybe an improvement in libido. And then 3 weeks later, it's like, okay, it's back to being bad again. Well, that's because all is more of like a system of all of these different things that come together versus like this one root cause. It's more like many root causes that actually lead to a lowering of libido and a lack of intimacy and that sort of thing.
So I'm very curious because I keep hearing like the stories, the assumptions of like, okay, get ready to have sex with the same person. You're never gonna have sex again. Like all these assumptions about you should want to. And I know I have a rebellious nature. I was raised both Jewish and Catholic, so that's a fun mixed bag. But if
No
you tell me
wonder
not to,
you're a rebel.
I know. I blame my parents. No, I'm kidding. But rebellion has always just been part of it. So like if someone told me not to do something, I wanted to do it more. And it's made me curious through my own sexual evolution of, before you get married as a woman, you're pretty much told like if you have sex, you're a whore, which is so ridiculous. But regardless, before like society tells you as a woman, if you have sex out of wedlock, you're a whore. But then once you get married, you're supposed to want to have sex all the time. So we have these decades of psychological manipulation of like, don't do this or you're bad. Don't do this or you're bad. Don't do this or you're bad. And then all of a sudden, hey, you have a ring on your finger. So your brain should think differently about this thing that you've been conditioned to think makes you a whore. How do you help people unearth that?
I mean, there's a term for this, what you're talking about. It's called the Madonna horror complex,
Oh, I
right?
love that.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's exactly what it is, right? And women in particular, yes, this is what happens. It's like you're trained this way, and it's like, okay, it's like so much slut shaming, and like, man goes out and, still to this day, it's amazing. Like men go out and, they're having sex with a wide variety of women, and it's like, oh, right, high five, and all this kind of energy, depending if we're talking about frat years or not. But there's all that kind of energy. And for women, oftentimes it is. It's like so much shame. And so there's a lot of unwinding. One, I do find that a huge component for women is getting back into their body. And I think this is another reason why a lot of times with sex and a lot of times with intimacy, women dissociate.
Mm,
And so it can be very, very difficult to want it. It
yeah.
can be very difficult to enjoy it. It can be very difficult to be motivated to have it on a regular basis, because if you're dissociating, what's happening is you're in your head, your brain's wandering all over the place, and you're not actually experiencing the pleasure in your body. And this is also one of the big things. There's many things that lead to a challenge with orgasm, But this is a huge one, right? Not being able to feel, actually feel and enjoy the pleasure and being way more attuned to, hey, now I have, because oftentimes what will happen too, once we reach this married point is now there's like almost like this obligatory thing. Like I remember my grandma used to say things like, well, if you don't feed the dog, he'll go to your neighbor.
Mhm.
It's like, so then it's like, gosh, like what kind of programming is that, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like real obligatory at that point. So I do feel like in healing this, a huge component comes down to the body
Mm.
and taking a step back, and either through like self pleasure, or even better if you're able to talk to your partner about it. And I have a lot of processes for how to talk to a partner about intimacy and sex. But for many people, if there's healing, it's like, okay, we'll take intercourse off the table,
Mhm.
right? Just for a little while, and actually take a step back and say, okay, well, how far can we actually experiment with just touch, with passion, with foreplay, where you can still stay in your body and associate with that with the pleasure. And if you find yourself dissociating, and I'm not talking about like, oh, I all of a sudden have the grocery list run through my head and like, oh wait, what am I doing back in my body? If you're catching it quick, there's a normal amount of like the female brain that is oriented to multitasking that will like, oh yeah, like I'm thinking about this random thought, oh right, back in my body. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like, wow, I am like largely checked out and I am just cut off from experiencing pleasure. And so, it's like, okay, well, if you're in foreplay and you're realizing like, okay, well, when say breasts are being touched, for example, like, okay, I'm with my partner, I'm here, I'm feeling this. And let's say like a hand starts wandering further south, and once the hand maybe crosses the genitals, maybe the outer lips, for example, if all of a sudden your brain is like, wow, I am in outer space, I'm not like experiencing the pleasure at all. Now you know where your edge is.
Mm.
And so then the idea is like, okay, finding that edge and then just breathing and really working on like, telling your partner to pause and actually seeing if you can just hold that spot, you or your partner can hold that spot and just breathe and just feel that area, and breathing your body back into presence and back into safety there. And it's a lot. I do find like a lot with this is really about getting back into your body and being at that point where your nervous system can actually be present with that touch without checking out.
Yeah. I just want to make a small plug for the audience and also just like a subtle appreciation for you because this is complex. Like
Yeah.
when you're raised in a society that pretty much tells you not to do something, and then the moment you're married, you're supposed to do it. Like if you're frustrated or struggling, like it's not on you. It's your opportunity to discover what that looks like. And Dr. Diane Mueller is a perfect person to pursue that with. And I know before this conversation, I read this book, Come As You Are by Emily
Nagoski.
Nagoski. Nagoski.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
And something you said about like with menopause and testosterone, like our body is always evolving, right? Especially as women, like every week our hormones are freaking shifting. So what arouses us one week might be different than another week. What feels safe can adjust based on the other components of life. Like it's not just this simple equation. To your point, we want to know the one thing that'll work and change everything, and that's not how the guitar plays. And one of the things I learned from that book that I really liked in terms of language was the gas and brakes, right? Like when this happens, it's gas. And it makes me think of the Instagram stuff of like what guys think turns a woman on versus like what actually turns a woman on is like him doing household chores and her being like, "Oh God, I can't handle this." Um, but I personally have had dissociation challenges, not necessarily associated to sex, but just dissociation issues. One of the hardest things for me when it comes to dissociation, so I'm curious how it applies with sex too, is how do you get back into the cognizant space, like reconnected? Because that's all like I now know like, oh shit, I'm getting close to it and like I can bring myself back before I dissociate. But once I've gone into dissociation, it can take me months before I get back into my body. So how do you help people navigate it. Because when you're talking about it, sometimes it sounds simple, but the execution isn't as easy. And I don't want to mislead any of the listeners to think like, oh, yeah, just notice this. So, how do you help people with that?
Yeah, it's a really important thing you're bringing up, and thank you for that angle because I think the same thing is true. We can say that for dissociation, we can say that for difficulty orgasming or anorgasmia, which is the lack of or ability to orgasm, which just because you've never orgasmed before does not mean your body is not capable of it. So I just want people to know that. But all of these topics are really common. And so, as I'm answering this, I just want to kind of apply this even broader to all of these challenges because all of these challenges, when we talk about it, it really is oftentimes for many people not a flip of a switch. It's not as simple as like, okay, we do this, we go try this with our partner tonight, and all of a sudden everything that has happened in our beliefs and thoughts and nervous system is rewired, right? We know that we can rewire our nervous system. Like, luckily, we know that neuroplasticity and growing new neurons and rerouting new neurons is a real thing. A couple of decades ago, where we didn't know that so much. And so, but with that, that process takes a lot longer than, say, regenerating certain tissues in our body, like our liver. So, we do want to just recognize that the biology, the physiology of our body healing from this is not tends to be like a fast process for a lot of people. And it doesn't mean that you're not doing anything. It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It just means that there is the process. So a lot of it I find to be as much as this is not like a immediate answer, but exactly like what you're saying, it's not an immediate solution in many situations. It's really just repetition.
Mm.
And it's just because a lot of it is we are growing new neurons and that takes time. So with this, it's like, to go back to the guitar analogy, it's like it's many times picking up a guitar before all of a sudden your fingers just like end up on that D chord and the strumming sounds perfect and you're not hitting any of the strings you're not supposed to do. It's not like you just pick it up a couple times through the week and it's like, okay, you kind of get it a little bit, but to actually make it sound fluid, it's many times that is practiced before it really is just ingrained into the nervous system. So I do really find that for most people, through the body is the way to go because the body will just kind of let you know when you are at that edge. But when you have truly dissociated, or when you're, having problems with orgasm, that sort of thing, I also find that through the body is oftentimes how you get back. And that is, through breathing, that is through movement. I find dance, especially if the dance is done in any sort of way that is not a like formal dance where it's like, okay, we're learning how to salsa or that sort of thing, because there's a lot of cognitive, but like free form dance can really help people. Also, like, techniques that I know you've talked about, journaling and some of these basics. It's not really a lot of rocket science I find with this stuff. It's just saying, like, okay, what do we need to do to help the body process, and how do we repattern this over and over and over again every single day? I have found for some people that certain tools you can get online, such as like vagal nerve stimulator devices. So there's certain devices like our vagus nerve is the nerve that is about that calm. Our body is processed. Our body is safe. And so there's devices that you can hold up to your like vagal nerve, which is right by your carotid artery in your neck, and it will stimulate that nerve. And sometimes doing stuff like that will get people more into that state. But even that is like, okay, well, you're going to want to use this like a couple minutes once or twice a day. So it is that just longer and longer and repatterning. But what I tend to find both in myself and in my population is that when the better people are, the more people are at doing this, when they do dissociate fully, and it's like, okay, well, it's going to take me time to get back in my body, rather than being months like you're talking about. It starts to turn into weeks, and then it starts to turn into days and hours, but that does take time to get the nervous system fully rebalanced that way.
Mm.
I want to throw a wrench in
Of course.
some
Go
of
for
what
it.
we're talking. Why not?
Yeah,
I mean,
why not?
that's what keeps it real. Hit us.
Uh, we're talking a lot about women, it sounds like to me, which is cool because we are women and that makes sense. And I think women are the ones who get the bad name for not wanting sex in general. Um, but I have a question because this is something that I've seen in my practice, and it really throws a curveball at people because we don't expect men to be the ones saying no. And I have come across multiple scenarios where the man is responsible for the decline in sex, and a lot of times it seems to be related to porn. So I wanted to get your perspective on that because, for one, I think women don't expect men to not be interested, so it immediately feels like something's wrong with me. I'm defected, I'm not enough, I'm not sexy enough, whatever it is. And then two, if there is something else like porn that's responsible for this, how do we reconcile that? So it's a loaded question.
No, it's an important question, and it is a real thing, right? I see it in my work too, that there are men, while it is, I do think a statistically stronger thing that women are the ones that, are not interested in sex. There's absolutely a very, very real thing of men being the one that are like, I'm less interested in it. And root cause wise, from a standpoint of actually having a libido, and this applies to women and men, there's really three pillars that I find that most problems fit in. So there's like that physical root cause, which is your hormones, stress, thyroid, neurological inflammation, pelvic floor dysfunction, all those things, which all apply to both women and men, even if some of those things sound more strongly, one gender or the other. There's more the personal side of things. This is like how we're feeling about ourselves. Like, are we carrying any shame? Do we know our own body? Can we stay in our body? For men, one of the big things, and I'll get to the porn thing in a second, but for men, one of the big things in this category comes down to performance, right? And so it's like, and especially, I mean, it can happen at any age, but especially when andropause age, which is kind of like the menopause for men, happens, and in midlife, oftentimes it's testosterone falling, but it can be a lack of circulation to the genitals and that sort of thing. And just men realizing they're not as hard as they used to be. They can't last as long as they want. And I love the masculine so much. And one of my favorite qualities about men is like, the strong man's desire to just provide so many things for the people he loves. And oftentimes in relationships, one of the things that like helps him feel more masculine is being able to provide pleasure for his partner. And, it can get into this vicious cycle for man where it's like, wow, like if I'm not able to last as long and I'm not, then able to provide her the pleasure, and then he can really get into his own head. And sometimes I've seen situations where men just check out from sex because they feel like they're like on some level, they're going to let her down if they do that. And there's a real component there as well. And then, of course, like the interpersonal side is the third pillar, which is all about like how we are communicating, how we are coming together. Are we able to talk about this? Are we able to, explore things? Are we able to meet each other's needs? Are we able to talk about it when we're not and solve the problem together and be on the same team when we're not? So, and then, of course, like, the porn world, I think, can many times impact a lot of these, especially the second and third pillar, the personal and the interpersonal pillar. Porn by itself, I don't find to be innately good or bad. But what makes it good or bad is one, first of all, are we open with our partner about porn? Because a lot of times partners will consider porn cheating. And a lot of times people are doing porn, in hiding, meaning like specifically not telling their partner this is part of their life. And I think there can be problems with that because if a partner finds out, one, that can feel like cheating if they haven't talked about it. And two, anytime we're hiding something, there can be some level of, maybe like that rebellious part that's getting off on it. But then there can also be a part that maybe is feeling like a little bit of shameful around like having to do this and, doing something that, maybe our partner would not like. And so that can influence things. Another thing that I've seen to really cause people problems with porn, a couple things. Like, one is a lot of porn is not what's called conscious porn. Conscious porn is more a type of porn that is kind of more real to life. Like, usually in conscious porn, the actors and actresses are paid more. There's a lot more respect, so there's just kind of a taking care of like the actual people that are performing. But then there's a lot more like realness with it as well. And a lot of porn you see out on there is not conscious porn, but people see it as real. So it's like the idea of like, man inserts into female and he's in her for all of like 1.2 seconds and she's having the time of her life, having this wild orgasm. And then both men and women in the scenario are thinking like that's how the female body performs, when it takes the average woman 15 to 20 minutes to actually be able to get close to an orgasm, right? And so I think one of the big problems too is that when people are watching this, we don't understand it's like the difference between fantasy and reality. So if we're watching like a Marvel or DC type of show, right, and we see Superman flying through the air, our brain is very clearly orienting to like cool, not real.
Right.
But with porn, it's like it looks so real. So the brain is like, oh, that's real. That's how sex is supposed to be. And so I think that's, one of the things that can happen with porn is like, well, then if our life is not like that and our partner's not responding that way, we can oftentimes think there's something wrong with them or there's something wrong with us. So that's definitely a problem. And then, the third side of porn, which I've seen happen sometimes too, and might be more what you're talking about, is more like the addictive side of porn. And that's where we can have that almost that huge dopamine response. And I have seen situations where like men will tell their partners like, well, I'm just not that sexual, or I just really have a hard time like being interested. And then she'll catch him, watching porn and jerking off and all of that. So I think, with that, one, like I am not an addiction specialist in any sort of way, right? So if anybody has like a true porn addiction, this is not my world as far as like how to work with that. I do think there are specialists out there that do that. But if it is more like that drive from that addiction around like I'm watching it over and over and over again, then that's where I think it's important in order to get out of that to work with somebody that specializes in that. But if it's more around, hey, this is just enjoyable and this is just something I come to sometime and, maybe I like it or not, and maybe it's affecting me because I'm dishonest about it or because I have shame around it or whatever, then, using some of these other things that we're talking about here today can be really helpful.
I remember in my human sexuality course, my professor saying that porn can be a tool for helping build libido back up. So I was curious how you do the dance with that.
Yeah. I mean, it can, right? Because like even in thinking about this conversation of our guitar chords and like the novelty, right? Sometimes when we're watching porn, it's like, oh, we've never tried that position or we've never tried doing that thing. Would that be something you're interested in? I've also seen couples use porn as just like a part of their foreplay. Watch porn for a little while and turn it off and like, kind of just use the porn to kind of get the juices flowing and then turn it off and, put that energy back in. I've even seen, couples depending upon their agreements, like in any of our relationships, right? We get to write our own rules. So whether that is porn is allowed or porn is not allowed, whether it's flirting is allowed or flirting is not allowed, whatever that is, like we get to make up those rules. But I've seen monogamous couples have rules like, hey, it's totally cool if you flirt and, have a great time flirting with the barista. That's cute. Just don't ask for her number and bring that energy home and put it back into the relationship. So, porn can be used that same way around like, okay, are we using this to rev us up? And I think with any of this, it's like, what is that impact and what are the agreements? And are we talking about this openly? And are we having discussions afterwards to say, what about this is working and what about this is not working for, both like you personally, as well as, from a standpoint of, sexuality.
You mentioned in the beginning, sorry, Laura, I know I see you have something there. Conscious connection, is that what you called it?
It's one thing I said, yes.
What is, tell me more about that.
I mean, the idea, so this to me is like it's conscious connection, but it's conscious communication
Okay.
is a huge part of it. And what that really is taking time, I mean, to understand, first of all, that if we look at threats that come to the relationship when we're having conversation, it's interesting in surveys, like, or in studies, I mean, where they take couples and they're like, okay, well, in any normal conflict, let's say we're having a conflict around, who's going to start driving, Susie, the baby, or the toddler to preschool in the morning. And we're not sure how to resolve this. Well, there in a normal conversation like this, there's three threats that are equal: the threat to one partner, the threat to the second partner, and then the threat to kind of like that joint space. And what surveys have shown when they've looked at this is like, well, all these things are under like basic similar threat. But when we're talking about intimacy, there's one of these three that has a much greater threat. And that is the threat to the individual. So if I bring up something with my partner and I tell him, like, wow, I really want to change this thing that we're doing in bed, I have it's much bigger subconscious impulse to protect my ego at all cost,
Mm.
which means in a much bigger way, when he responds to me, I'm looking for threats. I'm looking for, oh, that's an attack on me, that's an attack on me, that's an attack on me. So then my tendency is going to be looking from that angle and responding like I am under attack. So part of what I mean by this is we need to go into these kind of conversations, one, with understanding that so that we can begin to listen from a different place. And two, I always like to go into these conversations kind of with like a backup plan. And by backup plan, it's like, how are you going to respond to me if you feel like surprised or you don't like what I'm going to say? Because anytime we bring up sex, there's a huge motivate, or there's a huge impulse for people to get shamed, because it's like, oh, if I bring something up like, I don't like this thing you're doing, like, and the person can be like, well, I thought that was kind of slutty of you to want that anyway. Like, not that our partners are going to say that, that's extreme,
Right.
but the point is, like, well, hopefully not. The point is that there's moments where we can get shamed. And so if we have a plan in advance around like, hey, if you don't like what I'm going to say, if it's surprising you, if like any of that, could you actually first say this to me so that I can actually hear your response and I can feel safe first? So we kind of go into it with a plan of how to navigate this to get our body kind of continually in that nervous system state of safety, so we can actually hear our person, hear our partner without being on the defensive.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and like, see, this is exactly why you needed that moment, because what was coming to my mind was, what I'm hearing a lot of is shame and vulnerability. So naturally, Brene Brown's popping to the top of my head because like that's what she does. And I remember reading this certain part in one of her books, and of course I can't remember which one, but it was like she was talking about this study she was doing. She had men and women, different diversities, age ranges, talking about sex. And this one girl was sharing how like impossible it is for her to orgasm when she's trying to make sure her butt's positioned in the right way and that her stomach doesn't look too big and that her boobs don't look too flat. And apparently this guy like slammed his table. He's like, we don't care about any of that shit. We just want to know, are we good enough and do you love us?
Oh,
And the girl said, like, that's not what my exes have said. And he's like, then you have shitty exes. And like, that was the kind of sentiment, very condensed from like years of reading it ago, uh, from the book. But I'm happy, Alicia, that you brought up the porn and male position because there is a lot of shame from both perspectives and there is a lot of vulnerability. Like, what does it mean to be a man? It means to always be able to get hard whenever the fuck you want. And like, maybe that's not necessarily true. And one of the things you said, Diane, was in any of our relationships, we get to write our own rules. And when it comes to that conscious communication, like, I think that's really what's ringing in my head is what role do you want intimacy to play in your relationship and why for you and for your partner, because healing this stuff is a practice. I think you did a great job of like reiterating the consistency and the repetition required to meet each other in a way that can be really rewarding and really connecting and truly beautiful, but it is a joint pursuit and it requires vulnerability with yourself, with your partner, hopefully, and like knowing where your limits are. And the pissed off part of me is like the stupid, distorted expectations of society that they place on us. But I think it's also the opportunity each of us has to rewrite the rules of our own lives, be that intimately with a partner or even with ourselves, going back to the masturbation part of like understanding what's vulnerable for you doesn't mean it's not vulnerable for them, and vice versa. And having enough care with that to understand yourself, to know where your limits are so you don't damage yourself or the relationship further.
Yeah, so many different things you said. I could comment on there. It's so well said. And it's like you have on your wall change by challenge. And it's one of the things I love most about this topic of sex for couples because it is so primal. It is so rooted in who we are. And there's so much stuff like we've been talking about on the show today and more that is associated with it. So, with all of that, there is like some of the greatest opportunity to one, like grow personally, but two, grow in the relationship because of the challenge with it. And that's what makes it magical. And one of the things that I think happens so often for couples, whether we're talking about sex or whether we're talking about other things that, come up because long-term relationships are hard. They just, life is hard. Long-term relationships are hard. They're wonderful. There are a lot of other things too, but they are hard. And one of the things that happens, I think, is couples wind up not being on the same team anymore.
Yeah.
They lose sight of that. And I've gone through it. I've seen it. I see it all the time in people in my personal and professional life. And something you said, I think, is one of the most important things to comment on, which is you use the word why. And one of the exercises that I often start, I have a lot of online courses and helping people heal from these things and get back on the same team and have better passion. And one of the most common exercises I start my programs with is this, where you actually sit down and you say, okay, well, sex and intimacy, why is this valuable in any sort of way at all? And if you have a situation which is desire mismatch, where one partner wants it more than the other, then what commonly happens is like one person's list is like this, real big, and maybe have 10 or 12 things that's providing for you, anything from like closeness to relief, to stress relief, to joy, to pleasure, to spiritual enhancement, to, on and on and on and on, right? And then, the other person, while they may not have as long of a list, when you actually get to the underlying reasons why somebody is motivated, it's like, oh, because you want to feel good. You want to feel close. You want to feel love. You want to feel stress relief. You want to feel all these things. So when we get to the why behind, oftentimes we're motivated, beyond like that primal side of things, what we actually realize is we have closer desires. Our desires are not so mismatched as oftentimes we think. And so that can be an initial first step to understand, like, oh, you want it because you want to feel closer to me. Well, I want to feel closer to you too. And so it can help to get that stigma out when we all of a sudden realize like we're actually we have more in alignment oftentimes than we even realize, because we're looking at this oftentimes superficially as like, just primal intercourse versus all of the other things and all the other gifts that really come with, with being intimate.
Hmm. I mean,
Well,
beautifully said.
yeah.
And I think that perfectly tees us up for, so how do people find more of your stuff? How can you help
Yeah.
more people?
Yeah, the easiest thing, I have so many great freebies, everybody. So I have my ebook you can get for free, which is Revive Your Love Life, 5 Easy Steps for Mind-Blowing Orgasms and Romance. I have my novelty checklist. I have my lube guide. And then I have a lot of fun novelty products where you can get discounts and all that. So if you just go to havehotsex.com, you will find all of my free giveaways. You'll find a lot of like promotional products like lubes and vibrators with discounts. So that's usually the easiest way is just start with my free stuff, get a sense of like who I am. I do have paid programs and all that you can check out, and you'll see some of that on my website as well. But I would say just go to havehotsex.com, download some of my free stuff, and just start applying. Like the biggest thing I tell people, and I say this in my newly released best-selling book that you'll find on that page as well, is that I tend to, with a lot of my work, like I wrote my book in 3 parts because while I have so much to say, it's like, here's part 1. Now go and do the practices. And then we'll get to, then we're doing part 2. Now go and do the practices because, all of this, it's like we can get into the whole mental masturbation thing, right? Where it's like we consume so much content and we're feeling like we're doing something. But the work is really in learning and applying. So you'll see that all in all my free stuff. I give you actionable steps to apply right away to your life. So that's where I would start, havehotsex.com.
That's awesome. I love that that's your website.
Me
Thank you.
too. Was it fun getting that domain? I feel like that would be a fun thing.
I have some really fun URLs for sure.
Well, thank you so much for being here today and having these conversations with us. As we've mentioned, I think that our culture tends to be much more closed off to having these kinds of conversations. And I don't think that's served us in any way. So I appreciate people doing the work and the research and everything so that we can have conversations like this. And when I think about it, there's not a lot of people doing it. I can think of like Esther Perel. That's
Yeah.
all I got.
Yeah. Yeah. She's amazing, but we need more of us out there for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we really appreciate you and the ability to have this conversation, especially when we get to talk about shame, vulnerability, and experimenting. Those are our favorite things.
There's a theme if you can't notice that we tend to go to, but it's fine. I do love those words. But yes, I reiterate what Alicia said. This is how we change by starting to have conversations. So
Yeah.
I love your domain. I love the free resources. And I heard this one quote once, which I think is the perfect way to kind of sign us off is horny is healthy.
Yes.
And if you're not experiencing your own sense of horniness, be that with a partner or with yourself, or even towards a freaking movie, like there are people on TV who are just, they look fantastic. And if you can't feel it there, maybe that's part of listening to your body, as you said. So let's be healthy, which includes horny.
Yes. Yes. I'm going to also say that in the future. So thank you for that tagline.
Got it.
And thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All right, ladies, we'll catch you guys next time. Thank you so much.